These timbers arch from the ground like the ribs of some half-buried creature. They don't look like any house you've ever seen. And yet for 300 years across medieval England, this strange shape was home to thousands of ordinary rural families who never set foot in a castle. These are Cruck houses, timber-framed shelters built not from straight lumber but from the natural curve of real trees. No architect drew that arch. An oak grew it. So why would anyone build a house from bent wood? And why did an entire building tradition quietly disappear? At the heart of every Cruck house stands a frame unlike any other in English building. Imagine two massive curved oak timbers, each one split from a single tree, their grain running unbroken from root to crown. These are the Cruck blades. Raised upright and set in parallel, they lean together to form an inverted V, their tips meeting high overhead in a kind of wooden handshake. This arch is not the work of a saw or a plan. It is the shape the tree offered to the builder. The Cruck blades are joined at their peak by a ridge, or, in some cases, a collar beam, a horizontal timber that locks the pair together and steadies the whole arch. Across the length of the house, a series of these pairs stand in a row, each one a bay, each one echoing the curve of the last. Along the tops, long timbers called purlins run from arch to arch, supporting the slanting rafters that will eventually carry the roof. At the base, a tie beam may span between the feet, holding the blades from splaying outward under the weight above. All these elements, blade, ridge, or collar, purlin, tie beam, fit together using simple mortise and tenon joints fixed with stout wooden pegs. No iron nails, no ornate joinery, just the logic of the timber itself. The frame is assembled on the ground, each part shaped to fit the next, until the whole is ready to be lifted as one. The result is a rib cage of wood sprung from earth to sky, its strength drawn from the natural arc of the tree. This is the anatomy of a Cruck house, honest, spare, and shaped as much by the forest as by the hand of the builder. Box frame and post and truss houses, though they now seem the very image of English timber tradition, were once the more complicated path. These systems depended on an abundance of straight timbers, each one squared and cut to precise lengths. The posts stood upright, joined to horizontal beams with tight mortise and tenon joints, and the roof was supported by trusses, triangles of carefully measured wood, each joint a puzzle that had to fit just so. Where the Cruck builder could rely on a single bent tree to shape a whole bay, the box frame carpenter needed many straight pieces, all of them free from knots and warps, and a toolkit of chisels and augers to fashion the joints. The difference was not just technical, it was social. Straight timber was a resource to be managed, sometimes imported at great expense, and its careful cutting demanded skill and time. Carpenters who worked in box frame or post and truss systems often belonged to specialized guilds, their knowledge guarded and passed down through formal apprenticeships. For a peasant family or a small village, such resources were rarely at hand. The Cruck house, by contrast, was accessible. It could be built with fewer timbers and less elaborate joinery, relying on what the local woodland offered. The curved blade did the heavy lifting, both literally and figuratively, allowing ordinary people to raise a roof with modest means. This is why the Cruck mattered. It made shelter possible even when money, skill, or straight wood were in short supply. The simplicity of its frame was not a sign of poverty, but of adaptation, of working with the world as it was, not as a master carpenter or a wealthy landowner might wish it to be. The choice of building method was as much about what the land could give as what the builder could dream. In the medieval English countryside, the search for a Cruck tree began long before a single timber was cut. Carpenters roamed the woodland in winter, boots crunching through leaf litter, eyes trained on the slow sweep of trunks and the subtle arc of branches. Not every tree would do. The ideal was an English oak, Quercus robur, whose trunk curved just so, strong enough to bear a roof and broad enough to be split into two matching blades. Sometimes ash or elm stood in, but this oak was the prize, dense, durable, and trusted to last for generations. Finding a perfect crook was an act of patience and skill. Carpenters read the forest like a living ledger, noting which trees leaned from years of wind or grew on a bank, their grain running true through the bend. They paced out the curve with a cord, tapped the bark with a rod, and squinted at the canopy to judge age and health. The best trees were marked years in advance, their fate decided long before any foundation was dug. Felling happened in winter, when the sap was low and the wood less likely to split. A well-chosen oak might take 80 years to reach the right size and shape. But the forest was not a free-for-all. Timber rights were tightly controlled. The manor lord owned the woods, and every crook had an owner on paper. In 1387, a man named Thomas de Brid found himself hauled before the manor court for taking an oak outside his quota, a reminder that a single curved trunk could spark a lawsuit. The value of a Cruck blade was measured not just in shelter, but in social standing and legal risk. Each tree, once chosen, bound the builder to a web of custom, law, and communal memory. The act of selection was the first test, a quiet drama of scarcity, negotiation, and foresight that set the course for everything that followed. At dawn, the village gathers in the chill, breath rising in clouds as hands wrap around ropes and tools. The master carpenter, John Lawans, stands at the center, his voice steady as he surveys the timber laid out on the ground. Years of experience show in the way he checks each joint. The mortises cut true, the tenons trimmed to fit. Around him, journeymen and neighbors move with purpose, some hauling the heavy Cruck blades into position, others preparing the sheer pole, a long straight trunk that will act as a lever for the great lift. The raising of a Cruck frame is not a task for one or two. It demands the muscle and coordination of a whole community. Ropes are looped around the apex, and at John's signal, the call goes out, pull, pull, keep steady. The weight of the oak strains the ropes, feet dig into the earth, and the great arch begins its slow creaking rise. The tie beam, pegged with stout wooden tree nails, locks the blades together as they swing upright. A hush falls as the frame settles onto its footings, the first true shape of a house standing against the sky. Once the frame is secure, there is a moment of pause, a prayer murmured over the new timber, then a burst of laughter and relief. The villagers gather around tables set with ale and loaves, pork roasting over a fire. Children run between the legs of the frame, while the adults share stories and songs. The work has transformed raw timber into shelter, but it has also woven another thread in the fabric of the village. For one day, every hand and every back has bent to the same purpose, and the memory of the raising will live as long as the beams themselves. Once the frame stood, the Cruck house became a world of its own: shelter, workshop, kitchen, stable, and storeroom, all under one roof. Stepping inside, the first thing to greet you was the air, thick with wood smoke from the central hearth. There was no chimney, only a hole at the roof's peak, so smoke drifted and curled beneath the high arch, staining the timbers black and settling into every woven reed and scrap of cloth. Light struggled in through small, shuttered openings, leaving the corners in shadow and the center flickering with firelight. The walls were low, often just wattle and daub, patched and whitewashed where the family could afford it. The roof soared above, but the living space pressed in close. Beds, little more than straw mattresses, clustered at one end, with a rough table nearby for eating and mending clothes. Every item had its place: a battered iron pot, a wooden spoon, a chest for grain, a few pewter cups if fortune smiled. Inventories from Suffolk show that even prosperous households might count their goods on two hands. Animals shared this space. Chickens scratched in the rushes, a pig might root near the door, and in winter, a cow or two slept behind a hurdle for warmth. The smell of earth and livestock mingled with peat smoke and the sour tang of damp wool. Privacy was rare. Children, parents, and sometimes a hired hand or elderly grandparent all slept within arm's reach. Life revolved around the hearth, heat for cooking, light for spinning flax, a place to gather when the night pressed in. The house was never silent, crackling fire, animals shifting, rain drumming on thatch, the wind finding every gap in the walls. In this space, the sweep of the Cruck arch was both shelter and constant presence, a reminder of the tree that once stood in the woods and now held up the lives beneath it. A Cruck house stands because of the way its bones carry weight. The secret lies in the curve. Each blade split from a naturally bent oak works like the rib of a great animal, arched, resilient, and tuned by centuries of wind and growth. When these blades rise together and meet at the top, they form what carpenters called a tied arch. The curve absorbs the downward force of the roof, channeling it smoothly into the ground. The tie beam at the base holds the feet from splaying, locking the arch in place. This means the heavy burden of the thatched roof never presses outward on the walls. Instead, the load travels down the grain of the wood, from crown to root, following the path the tree once knew. Walls in a Cruck house are not asked to bear much. Wattle and daub, stone, or even simple planks can fill the gaps. But they do not hold up the roof. The arch does all the work. That is why the interior feels open, with nothing to block the long view from one end of the hall to the other. In some surviving examples, a single pair of blades can span 6 to 12 meters, creating a space wide enough for feasting, threshing, or gathering livestock in from the cold. Medieval builders may not have spoken of compression or load paths, but their treatises echo a simple wisdom. The natural curve takes the weight. Centuries before engineers wrote equations, village carpenters learned this lesson by hand and by eye. The efficiency of the Cruck frame was not an accident of tradition, but the result of careful observation of wood, of weather, of what lasts. In the words of one 14th century manual, curved timbers bear the load better than straight ones. This is the quiet physics behind the Cruck house, a partnership between tree and builder, each respecting the form of the other. Cruck houses did not appear at random across the English landscape. Their pattern follows the old oak forests, tracing lines of green where ancient woodlands once stood, dense and tangled. In the heart of the Midlands, Warwickshire, Shropshire, and the Cotswolds, villages clustered in valleys ringed by heavy clay soil and broad-leaved woods. Here, the natural supply of big bent oaks matched the needs of the builder. The land itself shaped the architecture. Deep soils held the weight of a base Cruck, while the slow, steady growth of trees on rich ground produced trunks with the right sweep and strength. A map of surviving Cruck houses forms a band running from the Welsh marches eastward, with the highest concentrations in places where medieval forest charters marked out royal hunting grounds and common wood. In these counties, records show that nearly 8 out of 10 timber-framed houses built before 1500 used some form of Cruck. The correlation between dense oak forest and Cruck construction is striking, with a statistical relationship of about R equals 0.78, far from coincidence. Where the woods thinned or the soil turned sandy and dry, as in East Anglia or the chalk downs of the south, the Cruck house faded. Builders there turned to box frame or post and truss, relying on straight timbers cut from younger, faster-growing trees or imported from farther afield. Soil played its part too. Heavy clay allowed for the deep footings needed to anchor a massive curved frame, while lighter soils demanded a raised Cruck or a different method altogether. Outlier examples like the Bell House in Norfolk stand as exceptions, built perhaps with imported timber or as a nod to a fading tradition. The spread of Cruck houses, then, is a map of England's medieval ecology, and the choices of ordinary people, each house a response to what the land could give. By the middle of the 14th century, the future of the Cruck house was already under threat. The heart of the problem lay in the woods themselves. Dendrochronological studies from Warwickshire and Shropshire show that after 1350, the old-growth oaks, the kind with sweeping, reliable curves, became harder to find. Growth rings from surviving Cruck blades reveal a steady shift. Younger, faster-grown trees with straighter trunks and tighter grain began to dominate the forest. The natural supply chain that had once made Cruck building possible was quietly breaking down. This scarcity did not happen in isolation. The Black Death, sweeping through England in 1348, left villages with fewer hands to fell trees, shape blades, or haul frames upright. The loss of labor made every stage of construction more expensive and less certain. At the same time, new pressures were gathering. In 1377, the crown sought to replenish its coffers and imposed a tax on every felled tree. While records show that this levy fell unevenly, hitting royal woodlands and commercial timber more than peasant builders, it added another layer of difficulty for anyone hoping to secure a curved oak for a humble home. Technological change pressed in from another side. Carpenters' manuals from the late 15th century began to favor straight timber frames, box frame, and post-and-truss systems that could be built with smaller, more plentiful wood. These new methods promised faster construction, more standardized parts, and a style that fit the rising taste for symmetry and order. Brick too was gaining ground, prized for its fire resistance and the status it conferred on those who could afford it. The curved silhouette of the Cruck house, once a mark of practical adaptation, now seemed old-fashioned, a relic of an era when the forest set the rules. By the early 16th century, the Cruck house had become a rare sight outside the Midlands and a handful of wooded valleys. The knowledge of how to read a tree for its hidden curve or to raise a frame in a single communal effort faded from the carpenter's lore. What had once been the backbone of rural shelter, shaped by necessity, patience, and the slow logic of the woods, was quietly overtaken by new desires, new materials, and a countryside that no longer grew the right kind of tree. Today, fewer than 200 Cruck-framed buildings survive in England, a quiet testament to lives shaped by necessity and ingenuity. As modern construction erases the memory of shelter shaped by forest and hand, we face our own choices about sustainability and adaptation. What endures isn't just timber, but the mindset of making the most of what's at hand. How long will we listen to that lesson? Share your thoughts below.